The S23 might not look that special, but I think it might just be the most well-rounded and most competitive phone for its price range right now. Although I did have some surprising findings that need to be mentioned. Alright, so in the past, I would say the biggest issue with the S series, especially the smaller ones, is the battery life and performance. But this year's model addressed both of those issues with a bigger battery and a new Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 SoC. And the new SoC this year is a pretty huge upgrade. Samsung also uses a slightly higher clocked version of it. And the result is that I think this is the first time that an Android actually beats the latest flagship iPhone in GPU performance. It did so by 14%, which is pretty shocking. So the S23 could be a good gaming phone, but given how small it is, it's still limited by its cooling ability. In a 20-minute GPU benchmark, as you can see, its performance drops off noticeably quicker than the larger S23 Ultra, which has the same chip. But when compared to the similarly sized iPhone 14 Pro, the vapor chamber does allow the S23 to pull quite a bit ahead for shorter gaming sessions. You can see here it is significantly ahead of the iPhone for a 5-minute gaming session, but at the end of the 20-minute run, they're about equal, and both get about equally as hot too. So the S23 has pretty insane GPU and cooling for its size, and I think it definitely could be a good gaming phone, especially if you prefer a smaller size phone. And in terms of the CPU, so it's a substantial upgrade over last year too, with almost 30% faster single core and 50% faster multi-core performance, but it still loses out to the iPhone 14 Pro by over 20%. Overall, I'm very happy with the S23's huge increase in performance because it's actually noticeable in day-to-day use sometimes. For instance, I feel like it doesn't have the occasional judder that the S22 sometimes has. And another benefit of the new SoC is efficiency and battery life, which is further helped with the increase in battery size from 3700 to 3900 milliamp hours. After 1 hour of running a gaming benchmark in a loop, the S23 only lost 34% of its battery, and that's getting very close to the 31% lost by the iPhone 14 Pro, which I would say is the most efficient small phone right now. And after playing a 4K video for 9.5 hours on Wi-Fi, the S23 still had 13% left after starting from 100. So it's not as good as the larger phones with the larger batteries, but it's surprisingly close. I think the S23 should last all day in most circumstances. And also, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 will be in all S23 models across the globe, so it'll be an even bigger upgrade for those who were previously in the Exynos regions. And one more thing to note is that the 128GB version uses UFS 3.1 for storage, while the 256 and up gig versions all use the faster UFS 4.0. But phone storage speed has never been an issue for me, and it's frankly difficult to even find a task that saturates the UFS 3.1 speed on a phone. So don't worry about this and just get as much storage as you need, especially since increasing the storage won't give you any more RAM. They're all just at 8 gigs. All right, and as for the design, so overall, I really like it. It does look almost exactly like last gen, but just with the individual lenses on the back instead of a camera bump. I really like last year's design, so I'm kind of glad it didn't change much this year. The rounded corners and slightly rounded edges makes it comfortable to hold in any position, which I consider a pretty significant upside, since the S23 Ultra has sharp corners and the iPhone 14 Pro has these sharp edges on the side, which makes both a bit uncomfortable to hold without a case sometimes. And honestly, I wish the camera lens design stayed the same as last year too, because this individual lens look, which is taken from the Ultra, does get dusty very easily and it's hard to clean. But at least it doesn't protrude out too much, far less than the iPhone 14 Pro, so it doesn't wobble too much when it's laying on a table. But really none of these are issues because a phone case can probably get rid of all the wobbling, and ones that go around each lens individually will probably get rid of the dust issue too. Another nice thing about the S23's design is how light it is at 168 grams, but it still feels very premium in the hand with its nicely textured Gorilla Glass Victus 2 back and front. I've always been a big fan of matte textured glass backs. It doesn't catch fingerprints and it also doesn't look oily. I think it looks and feels so much better than the glossy Pixel 7 Pro and iPhone 14. So overall, I feel like this is a well-refined design that doesn't have too much personality, but also doesn't really have any flaws. And as for the screen, so it's the same size at 6.1 inches, But one pretty big upgrade this year is that the display now has a much higher peak brightness at 1750 nits, which is really bright and a pretty big jump from last year's 1200 nits. The peak brightness actually now matches with the Ultra, and this is a pretty substantial increase. In my experience, it definitely helps with visibility under bright sunlight. And although it doesn't match the iPhone 14 Pro's 2000 nits peak brightness, it absolutely destroys the iPhone 14 at the same price, which still only puts out 1200 nits peak. And not to mention that the S23 also has a 120Hz display, which in my opinion is a very substantial upgrade over 60Hz. It literally just makes everything you do on it feel smoother and nicer on the eyes. But unless you're coming from an iPhone, it might not even be an upgrade for you since Samsung has had 120Hz displays since the S20 line. And the S23 screen is still 1080 with 425 ppi. I think it's plenty sharp enough side by side with the 14 Pro, which has 2K plus resolution and 460 ppi. I don't really notice much of a difference. But a new thing is that the S23's panel now covers DCI P3 color space, which is notably ahead of the Pixel 7 and the iPhone 14. So if you watch HDR videos, you'll be able to see more colors. And this phone has great speakers and haptics that are on par with the flagship phones out there. It also has IP68 water and dust resistance, so the build quality is solid. The cameras on the back are still the same hardware as last year, but the new SoC actually brings some new processing and a new feature, which is being able to take 8K videos at 30 FPS. And honestly, the 8K video is really good. It's noticeably more detailed than the 4K video, and it also has less of that over-sharpened look that's pretty typical for phone videos. Even in indoor lighting, the 8K video is still much more detailed, as you can see here. And the file size is actually only twice the size for 4 times the amount of pixels. So I think it's worth it. And I think the S23's 8K video is even better than the iPhone 14 Pro's 4K video as well, but you can't film in HDR at 8K 30 on it, so it's kind of a trade-off between the brighter and more colorful HDR video versus the better detailed 8K video. And I think the S23's regular 4K video is just slightly less detailed compared to the iPhone 14 Pro's 4K video. And also, I would say the color in the Samsung video is a bit less realistic, with some clouds that look way too blue. Now, as for stabilization, so it's just okay on this main sensor. There are some notable darkening artifacts in this video, particularly in the bottom half, and I was just walking with the phones. And as for the photos, so there is a 50 megapixel high resolution mode for the main lens. And without zooming in, I think the 50 mode photos look a bit softer than the regular 12 megapixel photos since it has less sharpening. I think the trees and water here look a bit more natural in the 50 mode, but you can kind of get this less sharpened look even just in the 12 megapixel mode by using the camera assistant app and turning on the picture softening. And here's what it looks like side by side. I think it's great that Samsung lets you adjust the level of sharpening, but I feel like this should be built right into the camera settings instead of requiring a separate app. But still, the 50 megapixel mode does have its purpose. If we zoom in, you can see a big difference. The CN Tower and the buildings in the 50 megapixel image just look so much better. And similarly in this one, I feel like the 50 mode just preserved the texture on the rocks much better. I think the 50 megapixel mode on the S23 can keep up with even the high resolution modes on the more expensive iPhone 14 Pro and S23 Ultra, at least in daytime. Unfortunately at night, the 50 megapixel mode isn't as good. This sign here actually looks less detailed than in the 12 megapixel mode, so I don't think the 50 megapixel mode is worth using at night. And now a quick message from today's video sponsor, Opera. Opera is a browser with a ton of features, like you can have social media apps conveniently in the sidebar, so you can navigate the web while also talking with your friends on WhatsApp or checking in on TikTok. Opera also has a free built-in VPN, which encrypts your data, and you have 3 regions to choose from. So you can use it to protect your online privacy, unblock restricted content, but Opera also offers the VPN Pro, which has more than 3,000 high-speed servers. You can choose from more than 30 global locations, so you have lots of options to enjoy anonymous IP address and ultra-fast speeds. The VPN Pro costs $399 per month for a yearly subscription, which is over 50% savings versus monthly. It's a great price, cheaper than many competitors, but for my viewers, you guys can get 3 months free on any VPN Pro yearly plan. So check out Opera at the link in the description. But just in the regular 12 megapixel mode, the S23's main camera is still decently competitive. In daytime, it puts out some really good looking photos that look on par with the iPhone 14 Pro's 12 megapixel photos. At night, the iPhone's much larger sensor does pull ahead. The iPhone has way less noise in the photos, and I think it looks significantly more detailed. but of course the phone also costs more. However, what's actually a concern is the night mode performance. The S23 photo has quite a lot of lens flare, as you can see here. And as for the telephoto, so it's only 10 megapixels, but it actually upscales to 12 megapixel when you take a photo with it. And in daylight, impressively, the photos do look quite close to the iPhone 14 Pros. And in this one in particular, I think it actually did a much better job with better details. But in lower light, it tends to be weaker. As you can see here, this decoration is much sharper in the iPhone's image. And still, this is a lot better than not having a telephoto lens at all, like the iPhone 14 at the same price. And when it comes to the ultra wide, so it looks alright, has good detail and dynamic range, and it's pretty good in lower light too. But one issue about the S23's ultra wide is that it doesn't focus, which is perfectly fine for most situations, but you can't do the super close-up shots like you can on the S23 Ultra and the 14 Pro. Okay, and the selfie camera is new this year, and I'm pretty sure it's the same one as on the S23 Ultra, so it's actually a pretty good upgrade. Now it's a 12 megapixel sensor, and I would say I slightly prefer it over the iPhone 14 Pro's selfie. The background is a bit more blurred, which I think looks nicer. And if you do care about taking raw photos, then you pretty much have to use the separate Expert RAW app, because the raw photos taken with the regular camera app just looks awful in comparison. There is now a 50 megapixel mode in the Expert RAW app too, and just like in non-RAW, it's much better, way more detailed than the 12 megapixel mode. But I definitely feel like the Expert RAW should just be built into the camera app. But not just hardware, the software is another standout feature on Samsung phones. Since getting my Galaxy S21 and making many videos about Samsung phones, I've become very familiar with OneUi, and here are some of my favorite things about it. So number one is the Galaxy Store, but not for apps. Majority of the time I do get my apps from the Google Play Store, but instead for the themes, wallpapers, icons, and always on display there. I love being able to just go into the Galaxy Store and find a nice wallpaper and then be able to apply it immediately instead of having to search the web and find a way to download wallpapers. And also now in OneUi 5.1, I can actually use modes and routines to quickly switch wallpapers with just one click. It's super convenient, and now I can use all the wallpapers that I like. And second, so the new OneUi 5 lock screen is very good. All of the settings are all in one place, so it's very easy to edit. I really like these different fonts and also being able to change these shortcuts down here to any other app. And third is Good Lock. So there's definitely a lot in there, but one that I always like to use on a Samsung phone is Keys Cafe. And in particular, using it to give my keyboard back lights so that visually it kind of looks like a mechanical keyboard. And fourth, so I think OneUi handles multitasking the best. It's super easy to enter the split screen and pop-up view with just gestures. And because it's so easy to do, I actually use this feature a good amount. And lastly, so a new thing in OneUi 5.1 is being able to press and hold on a subject in a picture in order to get a transparent cutout of it. I think this is pretty cool and fun. You can make stickers with it. So yeah, OneUi 5 is very feature rich and super customizable. This update does make it feel similar to iOS 16 in some aspects, but of course it still retains its distinct Android features like the gesture navigation, which I find more convenient than iPhone's navigation. Okay, so overall, I think despite the small hardware and design changes, the SoC alone brings a notably more snappy and gaming friendly experience with a much longer lasting battery life. The S23 is a very well refined and small phone with speed and camera that gets really close to the Android and Apple flagships. And when comparing it to the similarly priced and sized iPhone 14, it just has so many more great features, like the 120Hz screen that's more colorful and much brighter, the telephoto lens, and also way more GPU performance. Also, not many companies make top-tier phones at this size, so I think this is a really good contender at the 6.1-inch class with its good performance and battery life. The cameras aren't quite top flagship level, but in good lighting, it does come really close. And OneUi is a great operating system with some pretty neat features, and Samsung also has a pretty good 4-year software update policy. If you're interested in getting this, you can check out the links down below to get a small discount and also greatly support this channel, and you can watch more here.